All right, I'm here to give you a little bit of advice on what makes, a good experiment versus a bad one. We've already talked about it a lot, but I thought I would give some advice, for example, against, comparing something like this to the projectile motion lab that we've done. Um, Obviously, in the projectile motion, the Canon lab, we've got lots of sliders, and what you do with a slider here, incrementally moving it 10 times, affects how far the cannonball goes. Um, you got initial speed. You could start at 1, go to 2, 3, 4, 5, divide it up. I guess it goes from 0 to 30. So you could go 0, divide up 0 to 30 10 times. So move 3 increments every time. That would be a good lab. Changing the mass, we didn't do that yet. If you do change the mass, I think turning on the air resistance would help give you a greater span of results. But anyways, the point is, this has a lot of numerical stuff that you can adjust, and clearly you can do it 10 times. You could divide this up into 10 equal parts, whereas something like this, you've got a slider, yes, but there's no numerical value. It doesn't tell you what the intensity is. Plus, whatever it does here, it doesn't give you any kind of an intensity readout either. So this one I would not recommend, because you can't quantify what's going on over here. So you got your cause, which is a slider, which is good, but it doesn't have any numerical increments. And then you have the effect, which also there's no way to read that. So I would not do this. And then my thoughts on this: it's a cool lab, but cool sim. The population is increasing probably exponentially over time. And then you turn on wolves, and now the wolves start eating some of the rabbits, so the population is going to be more under control. But there's no way to adjust this wolves thing. All you can do is turn it on, turn it off. If there was a dial or a slider where you could, adjust it, where you say, okay, we're going to introduce 1 wolf and then see what that does. And then on another trial, do 2 wolves and then see what that does. If there was a way to do that, if they would have just built this that way, then it would, it'd work, but they didn't. So don't do this experiment. Pendulum lab's great. Just thought I'd give some advice on how that works. You can set the pendulum to a certain angle, and then one of the most common things to do is to see how, let's say, you could do angle versus period. The period is the amount of time it takes to swing back and forth. So you can turn on this period timer, and I think it helps if somebody shows you how it works. So right now, I can set this to an angle like 40, and until I hit play, it won't swing. So if I hit pause, I can set it back, and then when you want to turn this on first, and then hit play, and then watch what happens. It's timing the amount of time it took to swing back and forth. Obviously, I've turned the friction on a lot. But anyways, yeah, this has all kinds of sliders. You can remember with your experiment, you only want to adjust one thing. So in this case, what I just said, the idea could be, how does the angle affect the period? So I would want to set it to like 5 and measure the period. Looks like I'd need to hit pause, put it at 5, turn on the period timer, hit play, write that in my data table corresponding to 5, the angle of 5, and then I could go to 10, turn on the period timer, hit play, and now I know 10 corresponds to 1.6849. Hit pause, go to 15, play. Now I know that 15 corresponds to that number. So that's angle versus period. You could also do, how does friction? In that case, you'd want to pick the same angle every single time and turn on the period timer. We've got no friction. Now we know 0 friction corresponds to this number. Set this back to, what did I say, 40 degrees. It's always got to be the same angle if we're doing this correctly. Now, it doesn't really tell you the number, but in this case, I would just make up some unit. I would say 1 friction unit. Honestly, you could do that because even though they're not telling you what this amount of friction is, you could just say, well, 1 friction unit, 2 friction units, 3, 4, 5. So, yeah, turn on the period timer and see how that affects. How does that much friction, however much friction that is, how does that affect it? Well, we see a difference here. So that could be done. Same thing, you could, with the pendulum lab, you could probably do 5 or 10 different investigations, just seeing what one aspect affects, how the different aspects affect the period. That is very doable. You could do the length of the string. You can adjust that here. You could do the size of the mass, but whatever you do, only do 1 per entire experiment. Remember that. You don't want to change the length and the mass. If you do that, everybody's going to wonder, is it the length or the mass? Which one is it that's actually affecting the period? So remember, very important, only change 1 thing for your entire experiment. Don't be fooled into thinking, and trust me, I did the same thing as a kid. I thought, oh, well, I want to do the length of the string and the mass because then my teacher will be impressed and I'll change the gravity and the friction. No, don't do that. If you do that, then you basically confuse the entire world. You'll know that something's affecting the period. Maybe they all are to some degree, but you won't know what is doing what and how much unless you only change 1. I hope you understand that point. So these are my extra recommendations. Remember that I don't want you to do stuff that can't be quantified. That's a fancy word for, you can't give it a number. So even though cleverly in this one, and it is completely within your rights, I guess, to make up your own units here. I would be okay with that. Just say 1 friction unit, 2 friction units, and maybe even in your procedure, just explain that the sim didn't give an actual number value, but it had increments. So you went with a generic friction unit, and I'll understand that. All right, these have been my recommendations for making a good science experiment with these PhET simulations. Hope you have a great day. Like and subscribe.